Florence Paid and Renaissance Shade. I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA. We are Duncanville High School in the East United States, and today is September 22nd, 2020. And on this date in history, 46 years ago today, my best male friend Daniel was born. Oh, and I died 3 years ago yesterday.
Okay, so let's talk about Italian disunity for just a minute. Now, I think because of the existence of the Roman Empire, most people have the belief that Italy has been a nation or a group of, or, one united people for about 2,500 years. And it couldn't be further from the truth. The modern Italian state is actually about half the age of the United States. It was just created in 1881. Now, uh, Italy really, during most of the time after the fall of the Roman Empire, was a collection of city states. None of them were really united. There were five large kingdoms that kind of ruled all of Italy, but the city states almost operated independently. So you might have a little bit of control of the region from these different groups, but it's not really united. 10% of the population lived in cities, which I know compared to today is extremely small, but that was one of the higher percentages in the world at that time. They were a patriarchal or patria potesta society, so they were led by the oldest male family member at the time. Okay, the Peace of Lodi. This was created in 1454, and this leads to a 40-year time period of peace between the five most dominant powers of Italy. That would be Venice, Milan, Naples, Florence, and the Papal States. Uh, After 40 years, though, right around the time of Columbus, Spain and France began to conquer these regions of Europe. So let's talk about Florence first, okay? This is a Republican government, so it's really controlled by the people, really through the guilds, the major guilds of the city. The major guilds, this would be the major textile owners. This would be the major, uh, this might be the woodworkers or carpenters. Any type of skilled labor was really done by them. Okay, the Medici family was over all of this, and they controlled everything through banking, and they were probably the most powerful banking family in the world at that time period. During that time period, uh, they actually came from a family that owned textiles before, and they moved into banking. Uh, Really, Florence was the unofficial leader of Italy until they were invaded by France in 1494. And much like the United States today, there was a really large difference between the rich and the poor. Cosimo de' Medici, uh, he founded the Florentine Platonic Academy and reintroduced Plato to Europe. So a lot of times when they talk about the Renaissance, they'll talk about putting Greek culture back into Europe. Well, he got a little bit of a head start about well, before the rest of Europe was ready. Okay. Uh, Eventually, what will happen is all these major royal families will not repay the loan to the Medici, and their power and prestige will go away, although the family will remain. Okay, the Duchy of Milan. This was once a military dictatorship that was eventually made into a monarchy by Giagalesco Visconti. Uh, his family will rule here for a couple hundred years, uh, and the title of Viscount will actually come from Visconti. Okay, there were major problems over trade in this region also. because every one of these major centers of Italy wanted to control it. Francesco Forza eventually will take control of Italy with mercenaries called the Condottieri. The Condottieri, we'll talk about on the next slide too. They're not just in Milan; they're everywhere. His niece Battista was one of was really what we would call today like a Renaissance man or a Renaissance woman. She was educated in Greek and Latin, and she knew a little bit about everything. Okay, in fact, in some ways, she knew a lot about a lot, and it was really strange at the time to have a woman in charge. So the Papal States. These are parts of Italy that were controlled by the Pope. They controlled most of central Italy, but once 1500 rolls around, you have a combination of France and Spain that will continually battle for control of Rome and really try to impress their will upon the Pope at this time. Uh, they used the condottieri to help maintain their region and to protect them. But the problem was whenever there was not any active battles, the condottieri would get bored and they'd start to attack the countryside, and sometimes even some of the places that they protected to get better, to get more money, to get more supplies. Uh, yeah, that's kind of what the condottieri were up to. Venice. Venice, if you've ever seen it, is a gorgeous city. It's built on water, and there's large canals that go through the city and connect it. You've probably seen it on TV where people will get into the gondolas, these large boats, and have people ferry them around. So basically, they'll get on these boats, and guys will take these poles into the ground and kind of push them from one place to the next. Uh, because of their location, they did a much better job staying in contact with the Byzantine and Ottoman empires once I know that's the same place, but they continued to trade with them, and they were one of the first cities in the world to have factories. Now, if you're one of the most important families of Venice, you would find your name inside the Book of Gold, and the most important people of the city, the ones that were really counted on as citizens, you could find their name there. Naples, this would be the last of these little regions here. Naples is to the south. It's a very large kingdom. Most of the people were extremely impoverished or living in a level at or below the poverty line. The king had had much more money. At the time of Columbus, it was the largest city in Europe. Okay. Okay, Lubeck and the Hanseatic League. This was actually based in northern Germany, and basically the waterways that go around Norway and Sweden, the North Sea and the Baltic Sea, all these waters that could freeze were where they had this trading empire between between these northern European countries. It was based out of northern Germany, and the leader of this area, this city in Lubbock, was known as the Queen of Hansa. I'd love to give you more interesting and fascinating facts about it, but I think I may have given it more credit than it was due in being interesting. Sorry about that. Okay, so the first estate. Okay, society is based into three different classes, and this is something that you're going to find again when we get to talking about France, but this really represented all of Europe before that. At the very top of the food chain during this time period were the clergy or church. If you were a member of the church, then you were extremely wealthy. You lived better than just about everyone outside of nobility and the ruling class. This is about 12, about somewhere between 7 and 12% of the population. Okay. So about 7 to 12% of the population had all this wealth. Okay. The largest landowner in the world at this time is the Catholic Church, unlike now when the largest landowner in the world today is the Catholic Church. Okay. Now they don't control as much land as they did before, but they still control a pretty substantial amount. The second estate, this is your nobility or ruling class, 2 to 3% of the population. Uh, they own the second largest amount of land in Europe at the time. Uh, not so much today. A lot of that land ownership would go away about 80 to 90 years ago in countries like, uh, well, in Great Britain and in France. Okay. The third estate, this is a majority of the people, and everyone kind of gets lumped into here. But this is a wide range of people. You have anything from the poor serfs to landless peasants, and all the way up to merchants that had enough money and wealth that they might live pretty close to as well as the nobility. So all of those people were kind of lumped into one region. Okay. Eventually, the upper class of this would become the bourgeoisie and marry into the nobility because the nobility didn't always have as much money as your wealthiest merchants, lawyers, tradespeople. Uh, anyway, but no one in the third estate really had many protections in the law or from other people. Renaissance slavery. This began in Spain and uh, basically during the Spanish conquest, uh, while they're fighting with the Moors in Spain, you have a group of Muslims that are enslaving Christians and a group of Christians that are enslaving Muslims, and then some of them will also enslave, the other side also, or their own side. Uh, these people might serve as concubines to give them children. They also might be working as skilled laborers. When the Greeks uh, were conquered by the Romans, some of their best artisans and doctors were enslaved and taken back to Rome, where they would continue to do service to the Roman Empire. So the Renaissance really starts in Italy. This is known as the Renaissance or Rebirth. This is kind of a reintroduction to Europe of all the Greek and Roman cultures and what made them great. And what really appealed to the majority of the masses was the fact that during the bubonic plague, no one seemed to have any answers, and they thought that maybe if the Romans or the Greeks were still in charge, that the number of people that died must be much smaller. Okay, I don't know if that makes any sense, but we're going to continue going with that. Okay, uh, also the majority of the world was really controlled by the Catholic Church, but at the end of the bubonic plague, in 1453, there's a couple major things that happen in 1453. You have the end of the plague, you have the fall of the Byzantine Empire, and you have the creation of the printing press uh, by Johann Gutenberg. So those three things together are pivotal moments in world history, and just about the biggest year in the history of mankind, unlike the horrible year that we've had this year so far. Okay. Uh, as a result of all these different events, there's a start of a push away from the beliefs of the church, and a secular or worldly viewpoint developed. And there was more of a push to have a much more well-rounded person who might be able to deal with these type of situations. Uh, Someone who had skills in just about every different area. Okay. So Jacob Burckhardt, he is a historian who really was the one who got this time period and really came up with the concept of the Renaissance or the Rebirth. and how it was a much different time from the Middle Ages, and you have this distinct period of change. He's the father of cultural history, and he wrote a book called "The Civilization of the Renaissance in Italy." Okay, and this secularism that developed during this time. This is a focus on here and now. Don't worry about what's happening next year. Don't worry about what's happening tomorrow. Worry about what's happening right now in this moment. Okay? People in this moment are more important. We don't need to worry about what's happening tomorrow if we can't take care of what's happening today. Now, the family during this time period, uh, well, so arranged marriages, it's not really that strange for the world. In fact, the fact that we get to choose who we marry is a new concept from about the last little bit over 100 years. Uh, people's marriages were arranged from the time they were about three. Most of this is for business reasons or to try and move your family station up to a wealthier group. Whenever your marriage was set up and it actually was, you had the ceremony, the wife's family would give some type of dowry or gift to the husband's family. In Italy, the patriarch of the family, the oldest living male, would be in charge over his children and his grandchildren and extended family until he died. Wealthier women had wet nurses, so they didn't nurse their own babies. They had some other woman come in to do that. Uh, 1 out of 10 births ended in death, and it doesn't really say anything here. So, about 1 in 20 births ended in the death of the mother. And this is something that probably should be talked about more, but women died in childbirth quite a bit because doctors didn't do simple things like washing their hands. So millions of women would die throughout well, really die up until about 1800 because doctors simply didn't wash their hand whenever when they would deliver babies. It was not uncommon during this time period for men to have extramarital affairs and use prostitutes very often. Also, the lifespan of many people was much shorter, and blended families were pretty normal. So you might have one or two different parents that were not biological by the time you became an adult because your parents died from various illnesses and diseases. That gets us to the end of today. I hope everyone's doing well. I look forward to seeing you here in a few days, and I keep hoping every day for us to be able to do this in person. Well, until I see you again, have a great day, and I'll see you soon.